Once upon a time, in a tent, perched at the end of the world itself, were two cats who couldn't be more different. One was thin with a long, elongated snout and a striking blue collar fixed around his neck. The other was completely bald and blind, with no collar to speak of, their nose pressed flat against their ugly face. The cats were different, but they were both prisoners of this place. The bald cat was locked in a cage, and the long-nosed cat was chained to a post. This was where they would spend their final days. At least, they believed that to be the case, until one fateful morning, the curtains of the tent parted, and in, sliding along the floor, came a weasel. The weasel paid them no mind. She sniffed and scratched about in the ground for scraps of discarded food. The round cat's nose twitched, scenting the air, and then they spoke to their fellow feline, voice cracking like the crackling spit of a fire. "That weasel can reach the key." The long-nosed cat realized that his companion was right. The weasel had dexterous fingers, and as she climbed onto the desk, then she could reach the keys with ease. "Little one?" he called. It took a moment to get the weasel's attention, but she responded, at last, to his claw, tapping against the metal of his cuffs. "Little one, fetch the keys and unlock these shackles." The weasel followed his gaze to the peg where the keys were being held and thought. She looked back at the cats in the cages and she saw the beautiful blue collar. The weasel admired the way that it glinted in the torchlight, and she coveted it for herself. "In return for your collar, I will unlock the shackles." The weasel pointed to the cat's collar, and he did not hesitate when he answered. "In return for unlocking these shackles, I will give you my collar." Pleased by the deal, the weasel scurried up to the keys and returned with them clutched tightly in her jaws. She paused at the claws of the cat and carefully tested the keys in the lock until the right one clicked. Free from his chains, the long-nosed cat shook out his paws, relishing his newfound freedom. "Your collar," prompted the weasel. "We made a deal." The cat nodded and began to lower his head. He lowered it until it was almost level with the weasel, and then he stopped. The collar was important, and he could not relinquish it yet. In his imprisoned state, he had forgotten its significance. The cat drew his head back. Reading his movements, the weasel hissed furiously. "We made a deal, and a deal must be honored." Before the cat could stop her, she had jumped him, clawing up his body to reach her prize. Furious, the cat shook her off, tossing her feeble body away from him. He heard it strike the wall of the tent. He did not hesitate. He was free, and there was someone he needed to meet. Someone until now he had only caught glimpses of in his dreams. "Little one," the old cat calls out in the half-light. "I am not like that other cat. Unlock the door to my cage, and I will give you something in return." More wary, but still curious, the weasel steps closer. "What will you give me?" "Something the bold do not fear, and those with power share freely. Without it, you do not live, and yet may try so hard to avoid it." The weasel did not know of the treasure the cat described, and yet it intrigued her so much that she ran to the door of the cage, unlocking it. The cat from the cage sprang, pinning the weasel to the ground beneath their paws, claws tearing across the weasel's face. "We made a deal! We made a deal!" the weasel cried, and the deal was kept. The bold do not fear suffering, and those with great power are happy to give it freely. If you cannot suffer, then you cannot live, but may try so hard to avoid it. The old cat laughed stiffly and turned their back on the bleeding creature. But the weasel was not done. She had caught the cat's ear in the fight, and the larger creature's blood was fresh on her fingers. Scooping a potful of blood from her open eye socket, the weasel merged the two, drawing a single image across the floor. To Mim I call, a deal has been broken. Accept my sacrifice and grant me vengeance. I call for justice, a debt paid in full. The cat stopped, unable to move. A chill ran along the length of their body, beginning at their paws and working its way up to their chest, their back, and finally, their throat. The cat gagged, great pools of water spilling from their mouth. Looking back, the cat spluttered with horror. Their blind eyes were bulging now, reddening as the water spilled forth from every orifice. It consumed them, it bloodied them, and finally, it killed them. Your prayer has been heard, a voice sweet and gentle whispered.
The debt will be settled.
Another voice, deep and rumbling.
Your sacrifice has been made.
They spoke in unison,